everybody, and welcome back to the Progress Pondcast with Brendan Squire and Martin Longman. This is episode 19. We have a special guest today, and that would be actually Martin's older brother, Philip Longman. He's been a lifetime journalist, spending time at U.S. U.S. News and World Report, The Atlantic. For the past 20 years, he's been at the Washington Monthly. He's also one of the founders of the Open Markets Institute, a think tank out of Washington, D.C. that's been very influential with the Biden administration when it comes to monopoly issues. But anyway, we'll get to all that in just a minute. We're glad to see you. Marty, how you been doing as the holidays approach there?
I've been doing all right. Obviously I've been struggling with the database on my website going down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's been my big thing. But it looks like we're getting close to having that all fixed. So, yeah,
That was the turd in the punch bowl after we got on Blue Sky.
Yeah.
We mentioned this last episode that one of the best things about going on Blue Sky is that you don't get throttled
Right.
for outside links. So Marty, how quick did you get? How many followers you got on Blue Sky at this point, and how long did it take you to get there?
I have 1,800 plus followers, which is a lot less than I have on Twitter, but there's better engagement. When I post on Twitter, no one actually sees it. So it doesn't matter how many followers I have if they don't get served my tweets.
And then the minute you get a bunch of followers that can read your stuff, the website goes boop.
Yeah, the website crashes immediately. But our number of podcast listens went way up, which we talked about. So that's fabulous.
That is absolutely fantastic.
Which is more proof that Blue Sky is better than Twitter.
Way, way better. Like I was saying last time, I freaking hate social media, but I have to tell you that I am on the Blue Sky regularly. I'll also admit that a couple weeks ago, maybe last month, I finally had my last straw with the Washington Post, and I canceled my subscription to them.
Oh my God!
And I was wondering how this was going to affect my knowledge of what's going on with the news and everything. And I found that it really hasn't changed how much news I read or what I know. In fact, I found out that I learned that the Washington Post is often a little bit behind the game, and I'm getting my breaking news very quickly over at Blue Sky. I follow a lot of political people. I follow a lot of journalists. I even follow some Washington Post journalists. I saw Philip Bump posting something over linking to one of his articles at Blue Sky, and I couldn't read it because it's behind a paywall, but it turned out I didn't have to because the entire commentary after his post is all about what the article was about. So I totally got the gist of it anyway. The one we're
Well, and
gonna
that's the thing is that they don't keep you from seeing posts that have outward bound links. So someone can post an article. Hey, I wrote this article, and you'll actually see that. So
Yeah.
that is one of the nice things, for
It
sure.
is. It
Yeah.
is. It's also nice to see so many of the people I used to follow on Twitter on Blue Sky.
Yep.
With there's I'm reading Oliver Willis again,
Yep.
which is great. I haven't seen his stuff for a while, and it's great because he is just as feisty as ever. And I think we're going to start pivoting into the politics right about now. One thing Oliver has been on an absolute tear about is the fact that the Democrats have simply never learned how to message, and they're afraid of technology, and they're afraid to speak bluntly to people. He's been on an absolute rage about it. Every time he sees someone on saying something stupid, to Fox News, he's tweeting it. No, Democrats, this isn't what you do. He sees some Democrats say something really blunt, and he's like, "This is how to do it. Why don't you do more of this?"
I never could understand how Oliver Willis did his thing because he spent like his whole adult life doing nothing but watching Fox News, for Media Matters. And that would just have destroyed my brain. But
oh my
kudos to
God.
him. Kudos to him for keeping at it. And he does know a lot about messaging from all that experience, for sure.
He
Yeah.
knows tons about it. One thing that he's been talking about is the need for for progressives and liberals to one thing he's pointed out is that the right wing has made themselves an entire media ecosystem,
Yeah.
right? They've got ONE and Fox News, which is kind of ONE light. And they Steve Bannon still has his stupid show out there. There's their Ben Shapiro, the Daily Wire, all this stuff.
It's all
And
financed and they all interlink and they all amplify each other.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
They
yeah.
well, we used to talk about this back in the old in the bad old days of the Bush administration. We used to call it wingnut welfare, right?
That's exactly
And
what
we
it is.
and we used to complain all the time that there is nothing on the left or among the Democrats that does anything like that. And yeah, it's wingnut welfare, but it sure is investing in messaging and making sure that people hear what the Republicans are saying, whether it's true or not. They've got it, and they've been doing it consistently, and they have been speaking to their people.
Well, let me say
And
one thing, and this is what we're going to get into,
sure, sure.
is that the Democrats don't seem to know what their message should be because they don't know what went wrong, or they can't
They
agree
still
on
don't
what
know.
they don't agree on what went wrong, and that's one thing that we want to talk to my brother Phil about.
Yep.
And before we do that, I just want to, for people who know me but maybe don't know my brother, he is 13 years older than me, and we're kind of doppelgangers, even though of the age difference. I have a beard, he doesn't. But when I shave, my wife doesn't know whether I'm Phil or me. At one time, one of our kids used my beard trimmer and accidentally left the guard off. And so I went to use it and I shaved like half my beard off, and there was like no going back. I had to shave it all off, and I hadn't shaved my beard off in 15 years or something. So I'd aged, and I didn't even recognize myself. But I shaved, and I was like, I look like Phil, or I look like Phil did 13 years ago. And
My my
it totally freaked her out. She's like, you have to grow that back. I feel like I'm like
Oh,
married to Phil. Yeah, it
can't
was
have
my
that.
terrible.
when my when my there's probably during the pandemic my dad had to shave off his beard, so he could fit a mask over his face. And there are a couple pictures of my dad without a beard, but before I was born, and actually even right when I was born. But I have never ever known a time when my dad didn't have that beard on his face. And I moved back to Philly, to help him out, by going to the grocery, that kind of stuff. And seeing my dad without a beard, he didn't even look like him. It was it was ridiculous. Like, who is this man in my house? How did I come out of this person?
Well, that's how I felt about myself when I shaved. So, but yeah, so Phil and I have a lot of similarities, appearance wise. But I guess Phil, I was four years old when you kind of left the house for good. Is that right?
Yeah, I think I went off to college the year you went to kindergarten.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, did you go to Italy before you went to NYU or after?
I went to NYU for a year and then I bummed around Italy for a year. Came
Yeah,
back to Oberlin.
right,
Yeah.
right. So that was kind of a weird thing. We had a middle brother, Andrew, who was around a little bit longer. He was only 10 years older. And, he was like my little league coach and stuff like that. And then he moved back to the area. So I spent more time with him. But I didn't really reconnect with you, Phil, until our mother's father, our grandfather, was getting old, and you would come visit in Kalamazoo, and I was in Kalamazoo, going
Mm,
to Western Michigan, and that was like really the first time we like spent a bunch of time together as adults, you know.
right.
So, but we found that we found each other pretty interesting. So,
Nobody else did, but we did.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was kind of an interesting relationship, and then we wound up
Yeah.
working together at the Washington Monthly for
Yep.
several
That's right.
years. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, it was interesting to watch you from afar because I remember the first thing I can remember you doing journalistic was something for the New Jersey Monthly. We had these. Mom had some friend in West Windsor or something, and they lived in some community, and then there was some scandal related to it. Do you remember this? This is like
Yeah,
teen.
that was a early investigative reporting
Yeah.
effort by me. It was a big retirement village out there called Rossmore that
Uh huh.
was allegedly ripping off a lot of the seniors out there. So I tried to go
That's not
make it
nice.
right. Yeah.
But that was
Um,
like you getting your feet wet, right? Like,
yeah, so that's my first job. And yeah, and so then I went on to uh, mostly Washington journalism policy stuff with the Washington Monthly very early on, and wrote a bunch of books on various public policy issues over the years. And um, one of them sort of launched me on this path that I hope we'll talk about today, which is the issue that's come to be defined as the monopoly issue. And at the 20 years ago, nobody thought we had a monopoly problem. If you just walked around the world, it seemed like the opposite. You go to the beer case and there's 35 different brands and craft beers and all this kind of thing. It seemed to like be a consumer cornucopia. Um, but one of the things that, yeah, I'm sorry.
When That's interesting that you bring up the beer thing because I used to do craft beer. I was
Yeah.
brewing, and my then girlfriend and I were interested in starting a brewery because we were having some success with it. But, and as a result, I was reading a lot about beer. And, it turns
Hmm.
out that the beer companies are actually owned by maybe one or two, three companies at most at this point. At Diageo
Yep.
and Anheuser-Busch, which is owned by South Africa
Hmm.
now. And it's
Yep.
yeah, it's a monopoly,
Yeah,
basically.
that's the story. That's the story. Um, but you penetrated through that, right? But you can't see that just by looking at the labels at the beer
Yeah.
case, right?
Yep.
You have to look behind the scenes.
Yep.
And so it turns out that that's true almost everywhere you look in the economy today.
Sure is.
In healthcare, in media, in transportation, everything. And so it was kind of a strange route that I took. My first way into this was I 20 years ago, partly based on personal experience, but also just noticing what was happening to other people. I noticed that there was this very rapid decline in the birth rate going on in the United States and also throughout the world, including the developing world, and was trying to figure out why that was happening. And one of the explanations that kind of held up was there was a decline of family owned businesses. Even 50 or 60 years ago, most businesses in America were family businesses. There were family farms, family restaurants, family small stores, and things like that.
I grew up in
And in that, did you?
I grew up in
You?
Newport, Rhode Island, which, you know, it's had a long history, but in the 1920s, it was where all the millionaires lived.
Hmm.
All
the
those mansions out
Vanderbilts.
there, and
Yeah.
but for a long time, there was also the U.S. Navy in Newport. The War College is still there, but there was a big Navy
Hmm.
base right in Narragansett Bay, and I when I was just back there, and I never knew why the Navy left, exactly, but apparently Nixon and Rhode Island had a big beef at one point when he became president. He was like, "Goodbye, Navy," and there are photos of the ship sailing out. When that happened, Newport's economy basically collapsed. But I
Hmm.
remember when I was a kid, yeah, it was all small businesses. I would walk up the street to Bricks Market,
Hmm.
where there was a butcher where you get your meat fresh sliced. I would go in. I remember going in and buying my mom a pack of cigarettes when I was like 10 for 75 cents.
Hmm.
Right
Hmm.
across the street, there was a pizza place. Next to it was a family-owned newspaper store. Three
Hmm.
blocks away on another block, there was another family-owned newspaper store slash liquor store. Everything. And
That's right.
and when I go back now, it's
It's,
it's all core. Two of my friends grew up on farms. One of my friends who owned a farm just went out of business. They just literally sold the farm.
hmm.
But all the little places that made it quirky and weird, they're all gone.
Yeah.
And it's they're you know, you know Walgreens and CVS and, Megalomart and this and
Hmm.
that.
Dollar General.
So
Yep.
how did this collapse of small independently owned businesses cause people to have fewer children?
Well, because it changed the economics of the family dramatically. So if you can think about a farm setting, children as young as 4 or 5 can actually play economically useful roles in feeding the animals and gathering firewood and things like that. So children were an economic asset to the household. And once you get into a formalized, industrialized economy, where it's under corporate control, not family ownership, children go from being an asset to being a very expensive liability.
Right.
Where once you have a kid, then at least one partner has to take off and surrender all these wages. And you just contrast that to a family-owned restaurant or a family farm where the kids from a very tender age are contributing, are part of the productive enterprise of them. So anyway, that was the fact. That was my way in. It's like trying to figure out why birth rates were falling so quickly. And then once I did it, I found out there, first of all, there's a lot of received ideas that were completely wrong, it turned out. Like as recently as 15 years ago or so, if you ask the average American, certainly average thought leader, they would tell you that America had a lot of problems, but it was a font of entrepreneurialism. That's the thing that made us different than the Europeans and the Japanese and all that. Just just constant innovation and creative destruction and all this stuff. And that turned out to be all horseshit because the standard statistics on new business formation forgot to adjust for growth in population. So once you adjust for growth in population, turns out the per capita rate of business formation has been falling in the United States since the mid 70s. And that's the statistic behind what you see, Brandon, in downtown uh, Newport is this the decline of
Yeah,
the wiping out of the main street, the loss of the family farms, all that stuff, the hollowing out, and turning us all into wage slaves if we're so lucky.
if we're lucky. Hi, everyone. It's Brendan from the Progress Pondcast. It takes a lot to put out our program. It takes up to about 4 hours of editing on my end just to get it out within a few hours of recording. And we could really use your support. The best way to do that is to find us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Progress Podcast. You can set up a monthly subscription there for as little as $5 a month. We really appreciate our listeners, so thanks a lot for helping to keep us afloat.
This thing you can see in just walking around America, where Main Street is hollowed out, um, and the family farms are all closing. Right? That's not just an accidental epiphenomenon. That's something that really happened that dramatically restructured the U.S. economy over the last 50 years. And I guess the one thing I was going to say about that, which is a lot of people think that that's something that's just sort of inevitable. It's baked in. It's due to technological determinism, or it's just capitalism always going to tend in one direction towards the big getting bigger and the rich getting richer. But it's not. It's brought to you by very specific policy changes that were made by both parties over the last 50 years. And that's the huge part of the what's not being talked about now when we get to recrimination over who lost this election.
Right.
Anyway, we get into it then.
And it's like we seem to be in this situation right now where the Democrats, they can look at the data and they can see, look, we lost the Rust Belt again, right? Just like we did in 2016. That's what gave the election to Trump. But we're also noticing working class people of all races, including in our cities, including in blue states, not rural areas, not small towns. They're also made a big move towards Trump in the election.
Right.
And so there's this debate over one side is saying, well, it's this woke stuff. It's you guys started talking about trans rights and all these things that don't matter to most people or turn people off. And if you just stop doing that, that like you'll stop alienating these traditional Democratic voters. And then you have another side that says, no, this is all economic. It goes back to NAFTA and free trade that Clinton is actually, got a lot of guilt for this neoliberalism. And, that's the problem. That's why we're losing all these other things. And I think, Phil, you see it as okay, maybe both of those are part of it, but you're missing the whole thing with how stopping enforcing antitrust or not utilizing antitrust enforcement, starting particularly in the 70s, is put us on this long road. I mean, is that how you see it?
Well, yeah, but not just antitrust. It's part of what a lot of people call competition policy, which that includes antitrust, but it embraces all kinds of government rules, regulations, laws that basically set the terms of competition in society. So, one way it might be helpful to think about this is like with a sports analogy, right? So, you've got two teams like the Giants and the Cowboys. They meet each Sunday, they have it out, right? They they follow certain rules about what is required to score, how you keep score, what you're allowed to do in order to score, right?
Right.
And you can imagine that the governing authorities on of football might take the position, well, we're going to subsidize one team and not subsidize the other team, right? And that would be an example of a government taking from some people and giving to others, right?
It might
But
also
that
explain why the Giants are so damn bad.
could
But
be, could be.
yeah,
I don't want to get totally lost into this year's season, but
I'm just
if
sad.
yeah, yeah. But if you think about the things that determine who wins on Sunday, right?
Yeah,
Um, various even hidden subsidies to one team or another don't figure, right? But what does figure totally, right, is that you've got four downs, not three, right? That the way you score, the way you win is not by putting the ball through a hoop that's 8 feet tall, but by kicking it or running across a line, right?
yes,
So a huge part of what government does that affects the winners and losers in society does not involve just taking money from some people and giving it to others. The big action is by setting the rules of competition. So if you imagine that we had some government authorities that from now on, the only way you can score in football is by putting a round ball through a large hoop, right? The current winners of football would become losers, and the guys that just happen to be 6 foot 7 feet tall and were good at jumping and hoops, they would win, right? So
right.
it's the whole game, almost the whole game is not about taking money from some people and giving it to others through some kind of redistribution program. The game is changing the rules of market competition, right? Another way to look at this is take the entire federal welfare state, which pretty much just includes Social Security and Medicare, like together, those 2/3 of the federal budget, right? And there's just those two redistributional programs. They only amount to 5% of GDP, right? It's like a pimple on the back of the larger economy. And
Right.
yet, almost all that we talk about in politics is about this redistribution. Who's going to pay what to whom, right?
Yeah.
Which is largely besides the point, because the real way that government affects winners and losers is by changing the game, changing the rules of competition. And this is like something that previous generations of Americans totally understood, right? Completely understood it, right? And it's partly why they used words differently. They didn't have a something called economics, and they didn't have something called politics. They had something they called political economy, right?
Okay.
Adam Smith considered himself a political economist. He wasn't an economist. He wasn't a political scientist. He was a political economist, right? That's what they were, because those previous generations totally understood that the role of government primarily was through political manipulation of the rules of competition. Um, Sometime about 50 or 60 years ago, the economics department or economics discipline just completely lost sight of the fact that you economics was a lot more than just economic modeling. And politicians or political scientists lost sight of the fact that government is about a lot more than just redistribution. And that's when we stopped using the word political economy, and that's when we kind of lost sight of this whole tradition in American thought. You think about the biggest political fight we ever probably had in American society was over slavery.
Right.
That's an
Yep.
example of what I'm talking about, right? That wasn't a fight over who's going to pay what taxes and give what money to whom. That was a fight about the rules of market competition, right? Can you use slaves in the marketplace, right? And if you do use slaves, what rights do they have, or what rights don't they have if they, for example, run into a northern state, right? So we had this huge civil war over competition policy. The plantation owners were effectively the agribusiness businesses of their day. The northern free soilers were the small businessmen that didn't want to compete with unfair slave labor,
Yeah.
and they couldn't get their heads around it, so they had a civil war about it, right?
Right.
Yep.
Okay,
How can I
people,
compete when I have to pay my people?
yeah, that's
How
right.
fair is it? How fair is
Or
it
how
that you get to make all this money and you don't have to fucking even pay anybody?
That's right.
And
Yeah.
and
How
then
can I survive?
when they leave because they're tired of getting treated like shit and not getting any money while getting treated like shit, we got to send them back. Fuck you.
Yeah. And how can I, as a white worker in the North, compete against free slave labor?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is
Right.
the real reason
Yep.
why the North fought against the South, because a lot of white people in the North were being impoverished by the slave system,
Yeah.
right? So similarly to the way people complain today about Asian labor undermining American wages or immigrant wages, right? So
Right.
that's an example, But our politics today rarely talks explicitly about that kind of question of market competition. So the next thing I just like to put on the table is that in order to kind of understand where this whole new anti-monopoly movement is coming from, you have to understand the old anti-monopoly movement, right?
Right.
So, um,
Because people used to kind of get this like intuitively
Yeah.
yeah,
that
for sure.
competition was really, really important.
Yeah. And concentrated economic power was incredibly
Bad.
dangerous to the
Bad.
free enterprise system, right?
The
I
So,
remember.
American way. It
I'm so
was
old. I'm so old enough. I remember when Republicans used to give lip service to this. Literally, I remember when even Republicans used to give lip service to the importance of competition. And
yeah, and small business. Yep.
yep,
But I would suggest to you that it has been at least about 60 years since either party um, actually walked the walk on anti-monopoly. That we're almost like fish that don't know they're in water. This neoliberal consensus that took hold of the elites in both parties for 60 years is so ubiquitous that most people don't even know it exists. They can't even imagine a world in which something else once existed.
I
But it
think
very
I
much
think
did.
I think one of the problems that the Democrats have right now is not just not understanding this problem, but also that they don't understand their own culpability. And
Yes.
and I think
Agreed.
when they do, they tend to go back to NAFTA. When probably they'd be better off going back to, believe it or not, Ralph Nader and Jimmy
Yeah,
Carter.
that's right.
Because in my experience, those two and maybe even Teddy Kennedy, like
Hmm.
teamed up in during Carter's presidency to do real damage, deregulating the airlines. What is it, ocean liners as well, Phil?
Railroads, trucks, pipelines.
Yeah,
But to
all.
understand the significance of that historical moment in the 70s, you're absolutely right. That's where the Democratic Party joined with a pro-monopolist unwittingly.
So I was
But
just
in order to, yeah,
I was just a little kid in the 70s. I didn't really start, and by the 80s I was paying attention to Reagan through hardcore music and we hate
hmm
Reagan. But it was not a lot of I was in high school. I wasn't thinking about policy and stuff like that. So
hmm
for me actually my introduction to this shit as Marty brought up was NAFTA. I remember distinctly my first vote was Dukakis against Bush. But the second election where I was like actually aware and like, oh wait, things are going on. I know things
hmm
about things. Was Clinton Bush, and I
hmm
remember distinctly, I saw a rally with President Clinton, well, with then candidate Clinton, and I remember very clearly thinking that the one thing that he and George Bush agreed on was the need for NAFTA and the need
hmm
to and that we have to change our economy and we don't need those jobs anymore and the service economy is going to be the big thing and blah blah blah.
hmm
So I was like that is my first real reference point for that. You guys
hmm
both brought up Nader and Kennedy. Could you refresh my memory on that cuz I don't know anything about that.
Sure.
Nothing.
Okay. So first of all, just let
Because
me.
my deal with Nader was,
And,
I mean, like, I'm not a huge fan of the guy, but my understanding was he was all about like regulation and stuff like that, like getting the exploding Pintos off the or the Corvair or whatever it was off the streets.
Yeah, it's an
Brandon, even if
interesting. Go ahead, Phil.
I would say, Brandon, even if you had been a grown-up in the 70s reading the newspaper every day, you would have missed all this because it wasn't in the newspapers,
Got
barely.
it.
Like these are like gigantic public policy changes that remade our entire world. And as they were being made, they barely ever even made the newspaper. Very. And so let me, context is everything here. So let me just take a second to like set the stage here for what happened in the 70s. And to do that, it's like go back to the 1870s. In the 1870s, we had American railroads were becoming the most important uh, keystone of the economy, and they were very much prone to monopolistic behavior, robber barons, and
Robber
all
barons.
that, right? And so,
Some of
we
whom
tend to
some
think,
of whom settled in Newport, I believe.
yeah,
Yes.
that's right,
Oh
that's right,
yes.
yes, the Vanderbilt mansion up there, yeah.
Yep.
And so. Uh, and sort of the received idea of the 19th century is, oh, it was all a time of laissez-faire, right? Because you had these like plutocrats that ran all the big monopolies. Poor prairie farmers are like dying out there. And so, and then nothing happened. And then eventually we had a progressive era and some good stuff happened. And then there was a New Deal. And then Reagan came and undid it all, right? That's kind of the received idea. But that's not actually what the economic history of the United States is at all. In the 1870s, almost all the railroads in the United States went out of business because of ruinous competition with each other. And at the same time, the winners and losers in the American economy were almost entirely determined by who could get the best deal with the railroad. So, for example, John D. Rockefeller got these sweetheart deals with the Pennsylvania Railroad that meant he could ship oil cheaper than anybody else. That's how he became a gigantic monopolist. And so by the 1880s already, right, not just very populists and progressives, but but titans of industry were saying we got to have regulation of this core infrastructure, or the American enterprise system isn't going to work, and democracy is not going to work, because we can't have a system where who wins and who loses in American society is just determined by who's got the in with the railroad. It's got to be who's got the best product at the
Right.
best price, right? So in 1887, we create the Interstate Commerce Commission, which after a few rough years in the start, the courts eventually allow to basically set the industrial policy of the United States by setting prices for everything that moves in the United States, right? So it enforces a regime of complete non-discrimination against different players, and in modern terms, net neutrality,
Right.
because railroads were the 19th century network. And by the way, other 19th century networks like the telegraph system and the telephone system also regulated really early under the exact same conditions of net neutrality. And then when in the early 20th century, when trucks start coming along, we apply the same thing to trucks. And when airlines come along, we apply the same thing to trucks.
To
I mean, to
airlines.
airlines,
Yeah.
to airlines, and of course we do, because if you actually trace this back, it goes back to ancient Rome, right? They had rules in Rome that said if you control a core transportation infrastructure like a ferry, you can't be discriminating against different kinds of people, because then the winners and losers would be determined by who's got the in with the ferryman, not who makes the best product. So
Right.
this is like ancient law. It's like critical part of civilization, right? Now we come to like it's 1978. And Ralph Nader gets up one morning and says, "We don't need no stinking regulation of airlines and railroads and all this stuff." And he says that Interstate Commerce Commission thing, that's just got to go, right? The
Yeah.
whole thing's got to go, right? These big regulatory agencies, they've been captured by the industries they're supposed to regulate. They're against the consumer, right? And they're because they represent producers, not consumers. That's Nader's way into this.
Because
And
he's always the consumer
yeah,
advocate,
he's
right?
always the
Yep.
consumer guy,
Yeah.
and then, he starts whispering over to Ted Kennedy and 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 other like Democrats at the time, and that kind of sounds right to them. They didn't get the memo on why we actually needed the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887. And another thing that was going on at the time was it was an era of high inflation, and Nader and other policy entrepreneurs at the time were like selling the story that if you deregulated these highly regulated transportation industries, that would breed more competition. More competition would lead to lower prices for the consumer, and everybody would be happy. So they did it. And at the time they did it, there was hardly any discussion of it. Nobody had any sense of the historical significance or context of any of this, right? And the first order effect was kind of positive, right? The first order effect was, you might be old enough to remember this, but like in the early 80s, there was a period in which, all these new start airlines came online, and you could fly to Europe for $300 or something. And, but we
Yeah.
kind of know how
Trump
that,
Trump had one of those. It went
yeah, he
bankrupt.
had one. He had one. Almost all of them went bankrupt.
Okay, maybe
And
this
that
one
that's
wasn't Trump's fault. It was the one bankruptcy that wasn't his
yeah,
fault.
the whole industry. It never earned a profit again after deregulation. They didn't want the industry fought the deregulation, because they knew without the regulation, you'd have all these new start airlines coming all the time, and they would undercut prices to the point where nobody could earn their variable costs, and the whole industry would over time go broke, which is
Is that why
exactly what happened. That's what happened.
Pan Am and TWA are gone?
Yes, that's why that they were the first order losers. And then
I have flown both those airlines as a child.
Yep.
yeah, right. Go on with the wind. Also, the labor unions that used to have really good jobs with those big incumbent carriers, all those
Yep.
labor jobs were lost. Ted Kennedy, when he finally figured out what this mistake he made, he completely repudiated all the people that had talked him into this, tried to take it back. Senator Byrd was Robert Byrd. He said, he's like, "This is the stupidest vote I ever took." But
Wow.
yeah, but it did it. And then also half the country lost its airline service.
That's
And
a
then, and
huge thing,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah, right. And
I
then the
had no idea
price.
about this.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like if you're from, we have these hubs like Cleveland, Atlanta, Charlotte, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
you're not in one of those hubs, like,
Or if you are, because the hub is monopolized by one airline by
well,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 But like, you think about if you're a business and you want to locate someplace, you want to be near an airport,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's it.
and you want to have service at that airport, right? Like regular
Mm-hmm.
service. You don't want to have all these puddle jumps, and so yeah, I know. I remember back at the Washington Monthly, there was I don't know if that was you or it was Paul Glastris or. It was probably Paul because he's from St. Louis, and St. Louis has really been hurt
Yep.
by this regional air issue. It should be doing better as a city, but he did a big piece.
No, you know who that was?
Was
That
that
was
Bloom or
me.
Bust?
No, that was a piece that I did with with the woman who became Lena Khan.
Oh man, I walked into that one.
Federal, yeah, she's now
Right.
or just ending her term at the Federal Trade Commission, but she started out as an intern working for me,
Yeah.
No
and
shit.
we yeah, and she's smart as a whip and has incredible intellectual curiosity and policy creativity. And so she got onto this airline deregulation story, and we wrote a piece together in 2012 called Terminal Illness that
That's it.
basically,
That's it.
yeah, that was the piece. Um, so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of having been able to mentor her back when she was just a kid. Um, but anyway, that all shook out. And of course, the other thing that happened, it might if all they had done is just deregulate, then maybe this could have had a happy ending because maybe you could have had excess new competition and it could have reached some kind of equilibrium point where we just had better prices and more efficiency and market driven you know equity, right? But of course, that's not what happened because they simultaneously, and this is where the Republicans were just as culpable. They decided, well, we don't need any more antitrust enforcement, right? You know, so in 1982, Reagan says, well, it's like, well, we don't need that. You don't need a stinking antitrust enforcement. And if you put that in context, as recently as the 1960s, the federal government was suing companies that, when they merged, might control, for example, 5% of the national shoe market. They would say, no fucking way can you guys merge and control 5% of the national market, because that would be a predatory monopoly. There was a famous case where two supermarkets in the Los Angeles basin wanted to merge, and together they would have controlled 7% of the grocery sales in the Los Angeles basin. And the
Wait,
Supreme Court said,
is this
yeah,
groceries or shoes?
well, there's both. There's Brown Shoe is the famous case from the 60s, and there's another one that has to do with this grocery chains. So,
Okay.
and
Which one
at
was
that
Los
point, that
Angeles? Was Los Angeles the groceries?
Yeah, that's Los Angeles
Okay.
grocery state.
Yeah.
And so the resulting merger, if it had gone through, would have been given control of 7%. So now in half the metro areas in the United States, Walmart controls more than 50% of all grocery sales.
Yep.
Right? That's how far we've come. Right. And there's nothing baked into the cake that says, all grocery stores must be controlled by Walmart. The reason Walmart didn't get that big until the 1980s is because we had antitrust enforcement. It would have been illegal for them to do it.
Hey guys, Brendan coming at you one more time. Just a reminder, please support our work on Patreon, www.patreon.com/progresspodcast. And as always, please like, follow, subscribe, and share with your friends and family on social media, including Blue Sky.
We also had other policies like this Robertson-Patman Act that made it illegal for big stores to use their market power to jawbone their suppliers, that's the essence of the Walmart business model, right? Is that we use our purchasing power to jawbone our suppliers and get these cheaper prices than any of the smaller stores can get. Well, that was totally illegal in the United States from like 1935. It's still illegal, right? But starting in the 1970s, we stopped enforcing that law. By
You
the
know,
way, the great
this
Lena Khan last week brought the first Robertson-Patman Act since the 1970s against a
nice.
liquor distributor. So, we are making some progress. But these are just examples of how this world as we find it, right, is brought to you by explicit public policies, right? It's not just techno determinism. We could, when we talk about the internet, you could say the same thing. The internet as it's currently governed, it's not because the internet wants to be governed this way, right? It's because we took explicit policy choices. Brandon, you were talking earlier about, Fox News and all that stuff, right? Why didn't Fox News exist before the
Don't
1990s?
don't even
Because
get
it would have been
Yeah,
illegal.
don't even get me started on don't even get me started on the consolidation of radio and
Yeah,
communications, because
right.
as a musician, and don't even get me started on the consolidation of the music platforms, which also have
Yeah,
a
there you go.
monopoly.
Yeah.
As a musician, we get so fucked by this, so screwed.
Hmm.
They pay us
Yep.
dingleberries for streams. Every once in a while, I remember there was a tweet when Bette Midler was still on Twitter, when Twitter was still something people used, well, people who weren't Nazis used. And
Hmm.
she was like, "Hey, look, I made $5 on Kiss on whatever it was, The Wind Beneath My Wings or the Rose song or whatever. I made $5 on it after like 2 billion spins." And now what's going on with Spotify is they're trying to reverse Robin Hood people. If you don't make tons of money, if you don't make enough money with your music that's on Spotify, they funnel it to the bigger acts.
Hmm.
So you're a small businessman. You got your little band playing your rock and roll music, da da da, and you got your couple bucks coming in. It's not a lot, but you're not making enough for Spotify to make it
Hmm.
valuable for them. So they're like, no, we're going to take your money and we're going to give it to Taylor Swift instead, which
Yep.
is just it's absolute bullshit. There's a video that was going around on Instagram. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, it's like the video is an old guy sitting on a stool, and there's these two young people sitting there like Indian style, looking at him, and they're like, "So tell me again what it was like in the '50s when you were a musician. You mean you could make money?" "Oh yeah, we used to put out a record. You could make a whole living putting out records. Why, you could
Hmm.
buy a house doing that. You could,
Right.
and you didn't have to tour all the time." "Oh no, tour was fun, but we didn't have to do it." And whoa, and it's really really funny, but it's not funny because that's exactly what has happened, and
You
that's
know,
why
I I
the
um I
music
was
business
thinking
is what it is
also
today.
I was thinking also about the pharmacies, which is the you were talking about, Phil, the pharmacies all got consolidated into CVS or
Yeah.
Yep.
Walgreens,
Hmm.
just these Rite Aid, and then even though they did that, they're all going bankrupt anyway. You
CVS
know,
sucks so
so
bad now. I stopped going there because it's so bad. I found a small business I go to now.
they wiped out all of the independent pharmacists, and there's no going back to that now because they have. I mean, we can't even get into it all. Matt Stoller had that piece out
Hmm.
we were talking about offline, but the
I
way
read
that
that piece. It was amazing.
the pharmacies are organized now and integrated into the healthcare things, it's like there's no way for an independent pharmacist to compete on
No.
price.
Or an independent hospital or
Yeah,
independent doctor,
They
yeah.
right?
had
And
a
you
As
get
if
this
there were
vertical
such a thing.
integration.
As
they
if
had
there
But
were
my
such
my only
thing. Yeah,
point, my
yeah.
point would be like a lot of people think there's some kind of inevitability to this, but I can point you to very specific votes in Congress, specific regulatory decisions where that made it possible for this to happen. All of this was illegal before the 1970s, and brick by brick, right? Democrats and Republican elites created this. So this uh, this problem that creative people have, not getting properly compensated, right, from Google or Spotify or whatever, right? That's all traceable
Yep.
to the 1996 Communications Act, where we basically said to these gigantic platforms that are utilities, you're not a utility,
Yeah.
right? You right?
That's why
Like
radio
every
sucks now.
yeah, every other communication network that came along, you know, telegraph, telephone, radio, television, we regulated them as utilities, which meant you couldn't discriminate against each other. You couldn't be involved in other competing line or adjacent lines of business, right? Right?
Right.
You were just a dumb platform. You just created infrastructure, right? And nobody got super rich off that, but nobody went out of business either, right? Because they had a natural monopoly that was heavily regulated. Then the internet comes along and said, we don't need no stick in that. We just like, and that's why, for example, Martin, you used to get fairly good revenues, I think, selling ads on
Oh,
your right,
that was a
right,
brief thing. It was like 2005 and 2006, and
yeah,
then right around that time, it fell off a cliff. It went from
yeah,
a few $100s a month to
yeah.
cents.
And there's a
Um,
very
yeah.
specific reason why that happened because uh, uh, the Justice Department decided to allow a merger between Google and DoubleClick that allowed Google to wrap up the advertising market so that they not only became the world's largest purveyor of digital ads, but they controlled the marketplace in
Yeah,
which digital ads were bought and sold. Right,
exactly.
right. Like there's no even remote parallel to this in any other time in American history. It'd be like the New York Stock Exchange was itself a gigantic corporation that traded stocks on its own account, right, and bet against everybody else, right? That's what Google was able to do by being allowed exempted from antitrust enforcement with that purchase of DoubleClick and many other things they've done along that. All of this is public policy, all of it. Not no techno determinism. There's nothing that says just because it's digital it has to screw creative people, right? Or just because it's digital there's no controlling it, right? It anyway. That's how we got here, and that's what I don't see in the conversation at all. I think guys on bar stools pretty well understand this at a gut level. They have a gut level understanding that elites in the United States have fucked them over.
Yeah,
And whatever business they're in, if they're a musician, they're a writer, they're a home builder, whatever they do,
But they
right?
don't have the language to speak
They
to
don't have the
say it.
language.
They don't have the
They don't
language to
know.
say it.
That's right. And they don't know this history because most of these stories I'm telling, they're not in the newspaper. They weren't in the newspaper when they were happening.
well,
Back when
and
they were
then
happening, they
and
were like
then
debating the Panama Canals or something ridiculous, right? It's
well,
these epic decisions that just took away the birthright of three generations now of Americans to
and
have
but
these economic liberties.
we were talking about Brendan canceling his Washington Post subscription, but let's remember that that's owned by the creator
Yeah.
of Amazon,
Hmm.
which is, I mean, my God, you just think about all of those trucks out there delivering all those Christmas presents. It's insane.
But not only do they own all those trucks delivering the Christmas presents, not only does their owner own the Washington Post, but also Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services, I think that stands for.
Yeah.
Yep.
That provides the remote work and the remote servers that countless companies rely on. And I think
Yep.
they have a total monopoly on that as well. Them between them and Microsoft, right?
It's 80% world market share.
Yeah.
And including the US government, all the CIA's files are on AWS.
Oh,
Holy
good, good.
crap.
That's good.
Mm.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
so to tie this back, so we were talking about the Democrats having this discussion about uh, why they have lost so many voters. I mean, they tend to focus on the white voters, but it's, in the Rust Belt, in the former manufacturing base. But it's really it's rural, it's small town, it's Hispanic, Black,
Hmm.
in Queens, New York.
Yep.
It's all over the place. Some of it, you go to Trump and you say, well, Trump is slamming these elites. And, particularly in 2016, he was slamming Republican elites, Jeb
That's
Bush
right.
and his crew.
Yeah.
And, and people kind of intuitively picking up on, at least he's saying fuck you to the right people.
Right.
But it doesn't
That's
matter
right.
necessarily if he's got any solutions, or his solutions make things worse. But it's not about just cultural issues. It's not about that, but it's not just because of the trans issue.
No.
That may have been a very, very effective ad. I know in Philly they hit that ad harder than any other, and they said it was the most effective ad that they had, and I believe them.
That pisses me
But
off so much because my kid is trans. That just
right,
fucking pisses me off.
yeah, but it's not why this long term shift is happening by itself. It's not,
Yeah.
and it's also not just NAFTA,
Yeah.
because NAFTA didn't do all the damage. You know,
No.
it's about how are the Democrats going to try to create a situation for a lot of people in this country where they have economic opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity, you know.
Hmm.
And I think we all talk about like hollowed out towns, boarded up main streets and stuff. But it's also there's like a whole culture that a place has, right, of its own. The people that live there generation after generation, they pass down businesses generation after generation. The same family that landscaped your grandparents' house is landscaping your house, or serving you a pizza, or
Hmm.
or giving you your prescription drugs at the pharmacy. You know, all that stuff. When you lose that stuff, you lose your sense of place, and
Hmm.
Yep.
you lose your dignity when. I remember reading The Grapes of Wrath, and there was this sense that you have this dust storm and no one can grow anything, and these far off bank people in some office in some skyscraper in New York, they're reclaiming all these houses from people, all these
Right.
farms that have gone broke, and it's this so remote, right? And it's like
Hmm.
people have lost control of their own community,
That's right.
and it's like that's kind of is like what's happening to these people that are living in these places that are voting 80% Trump. And it's like their kids don't want to live there
Yeah.
in
Hmm.
their community when they grow up. They don't want that same job grandpa did might be gone. Grandpa might have been an independent pharmacy, but now he works at fucking CVS. You know, that's what's going on. And I think people don't understand how alienating that is. It's like the Norman Rockwell picture of America got just chewed up, and everybody
Hmm.
works for Walmart now.
There was a whole
Every,
episode of King of the Hill, the Mike Judge cartoon years ago, one of the early episodes where, Hank Hill, who the main character, he owns a owns a
propane.
propane company, and I forget the entire plot because I'm not a huge fan, but it wound up the propane company went out of business, and he wound up being the propane manager at the Megalomart,
Yeah.
and and he was
Yeah.
humiliated, and the character is humiliated.
Yeah.
He fucking hates his job. He doesn't like
Hmm.
wearing the red Megalo Mart uniform. He doesn't like having a script he's got to say to people. He
Yep,
doesn't like and at one point I think he's complaining to his wife that it's low grade propane anyway, and he doesn't like selling it because it's not the good stuff, and da da
it's
da.
not the good
And
stuff.
I forget
Yeah.
how it wraps up, and the what the denouement is and all that. But that's a real thing. That's a
Yeah,
real thing. My
And I think it also applies to not just people in flyover America and these small, dying small towns, but to the wave after wave of recent immigrants because this is part of, I think, what you're seeing going on with Hispanics, particularly, who, they came here because they believed in the American dream. And the
Yep.
American dream is upward mobility. And previous generations of immigrants could do something like get a toehold by starting a Greek restaurant, or starting a Chinese laundry, or starting, some small family enterprise where the first generation got the toehold and the second generation, went to Yale, right? And
Yeah.
that ladder now is missing these rungs at the bottom, right? Because these small stores are now chain stores, chain restaurants, right? And so that's, I think, a huge part of what's going on with this defections of Hispanics and other people of color who are, you would think not attracted to the Republican brand, but to the extent that Trump is picking the right enemies, they say, well, nobody else in the Democratic Party even acknowledges there's a problem,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, hell,
Right?
Kamala Harris spent all this. There was a whole
Yeah,
bunch of billionaire courting, and we love Republicans in the Harris
yeah,
campaign.
yeah, that's right.
Look at me with this one. Look at me with this one. Look at me.
Yeah,
We love billion. We don't
that's
hate
right.
billionaires. You know, don't be scared of us billionaires. We're on your side too. And I can imagine that being we don't hate you. You're okay with us. And that's like
Hmm.
that's got to be like a muddled message when you're like, what? But what?
Right,
You
right.
know?
You need a full-throated defense of of good old fashioned civic republicanism, of Jefferson Jackson upward mobility for the yeoman farmer and any other entrepreneur that wants to come and climb his way up the slippery pole. We're the party of that class of strivers, right? And that's what the Democratic Party was historically. And I think it's the only way out for us now. And fortunately, since the election, Trump shows every indication that he's going to break every single one of his promises along these lines, right? Because he's cuddling up to these plutocracy.
He's already saying he's not going to
Yeah,
get down the price of
yeah,
groceries. It's hard to get
yeah.
things to
That's
go
right.
down once they
That's
get up.
right.
Well,
And meet
his
my new
heat.
best friend Elon Musk, and and so he, I think they're setting us up nicely for a populist revolt against their own rule. But we got to get our stuff together, right? We got to understand, right? We have to signal that we have the right enemy. So I hear a lot of people saying we need a Sister Soldier moment, where we take, yeah. Well, we need, if you're going to do the triangulation game, you need a Sister Soldier moment with neoliberals, right? You need
Yeah.
to like point to somebody, right, that's part of the Democratic power base and say, could be Larry Summers, for example, and say, what, we hate you, we repudiate you,
Yeah,
you're not allowed in our party anymore.
I would gladly throw him out a window.
Yeah. But you got to do that, right? And it's way more important than putting space between you and some pro-trans activist or something, right? It's way, because that's what people aren't hearing, in my opinion, from this party. Like
Well,
you were saying, Brendan, that a lot of people, they get these mixed messages that, oh, meet my new best friend Liz Cheney, you know
Yeah.
me, me, look at all these bros for Democrats or bros for Harris, right? It's like, no, we got to do this. And it's the thing about it is it's an all-American creed, right? This is the secret sauce of the United States.
It always has been.
Yeah, this is it. This is not socialism, right? At
no,
all,
it's the
right? This
No.
is
opposite. It's
pro-capitalism.
entrepreneurialism.
That's right.
It's
It's
being
exactly.
able to go out there and succeed because you've got a fair shot and
That's it.
everything's not stacked against you. But I
That's
got to
it.
say one thing in the Democrats' defense, specifically the Biden administration's defense. And I know you wrote a piece back in, I think it was
I was just
July,
about to
Phil,
reference that.
talking about how actually outstanding Biden has been, partly because of your old protege, Lena Khan. But he actually did a great job of tackling these issues and got zero credit for it. And that might be because he was just, he got old and he couldn't do the communications himself. But
Yeah, they never said anything about that. You never saw
Yeah. I
anything,
mean,
and you
look,
never saw anything in the news about any of the antitrust actions they took. The only reason I know about it is because I go out of my way to inform yourself. I remember reading this article earlier this year that I'm
yeah.
looking at right
Hmm.
now. They put a stake through neoliberalism. Now the vice president has to convince voters that her blah 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 will improve their lives. Great
Hmm.
article, and it's true, But they didn't.
What was the name of that article for our listeners? And they could go.
This is from Washington Monthly, July 26th, 2024. Biden and Harris broke the suffocating Washington consensus on economics.
That's
That is
yeah.
the one
By Phil, my brother,
by Philip
Yeah.
Longman,
our
who is on our
guest.
show right now.
Yes. Yes. And
Well, they didn't brand it. That's true. And I think having been kind of close to this, um, a lot of people at the White House either didn't understand what Lena and others in the administration were doing on this front, or were actively hostile to it. And so, and again, the press is like the pre you remember when people say Bidenomics, like what do they think of, right? It's like, well, he passed this big infrastructure bill,
a
right?
good bill,
Well,
though.
that's an example.
Good
Yeah, good
bill.
bill,
Could have
Yeah.
been
but
better if not for
you
Joe
know,
fucking Manchin.
yeah, and I'm glad he did it, and I worked my best of my ability to get that through and support it, right? But I worked that out a couple months ago. It's like if you take the 10-year flow of funds that's going through the Inflation Reduction Act, it comes to like 0.002% of GDP, right? It's like, well, GDP is a big thing, so a little tiny fraction of GDP can make a lot of difference to somebody, right? But in the grander scheme of things, that's just nothing, right? Meanwhile, right, these changes on antitrust, these guys, the Biden administration and the Justice Department, they have a lawsuit, two lawsuits, one of which they've already won, and another one they're about to win against Google. And when they blow up Google, right, and force it to be split into a million pieces like Standard Oil, right, the effect on GDP will be 1,000 times greater, right, 10,000 times greater than anything that came through the Inflation Reduction Act,
All right,
right? And that's again,
you're gonna have to try to paint a picture of that for me and for the listeners, because you can say that, but how is that possible?
well, we've been talking earlier in this conversation about what the Google platform control
Right.
has done to musicians, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
What it's done to the media in general, right? Which,
Mhm.
what also what especially through Google's control of the advertising revenue, it's completely reordered the entire information ecology of the world, right? So that mainstream publications no longer have a business model by which they can make money, because the advertising that supported journalism in the past is now being diverted to the shareholders of Google, and it's no longer available for the production of responsible, fact-based, evidence-based journalism, right? Well, let's just count the consequences that come from that, right?
Right.
In terms of like how well is this country managed? How
So
how
you're saying when you're you're
yeah.
saying that even though Trump's becoming president, this case against Google is going to go through and it's going to have some really beneficial effects.
Well, because Trump did become president before they got it done, well, it'll be Trump's DOJ that will decide what the settlements are. So
Okay.
we'll see. Um, and it's a whole other conversation, because there's elements of the MAGA movement that are as hostile to these platforms as the three of us are, for
Right.
their own reasons. So it's not a foregone conclusion that this breakup won't happen
Okay.
anyway. But that's an example of like the use of public policy to reorder markets, right? Google is a key infrastructure of every other business in America, right? Depends on that infrastructure to get it's standing between them and their customers and them and their suppliers, right? And
Yep.
so and Amazon is probably is another example. It might be some ways easier to understand, how Amazon's being the mall of America, right, stands between merchants and customers, right? If you break that up, what percentage of GDP is affected? Like basically the entire retail sector of the United States, which is, and all of its suppliers and all the transportation modes that feed that supply chains. It's everything. It's
Yeah.
everything.
With
It's not some
Amazon,
like
it's
little
everything.
chip factory in Austin, which is right. I mean, it's like, let's get real here. That's where the action is, right? And
Yeah.
it's like it's as big as slavery was in the 1860s. You break that, you totally reorder the American economy, right?
Right.
Just like we did in the 1860s. We said no more slavery. Now we become an industrial country, not an agro-business exploitation country, right? So anyway, that's what I mean by what's at stake here.
All right.
Unfortunately, because we lost this election, I think my best guess is that Trump's going to be kind of like Nixon was on antitrust, and he's going to go around. He's going to go down the Fortune 500 companies, and he's going to say, "Well, that's a nice company you got there. Wouldn't it be a shame if my DOJ sicked you with an antitrust suit?" You know, so maybe you would like to give me a campaign contribution or hire my daughter or something like that,
Well,
right?
no one he's appointed yet is not a billionaire.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yes, I think you're right. I think though we've gone on quite a long time, and we got to move towards a conclusion. And there was one thing that I think might take us there is we've talked a lot, but how does this relate to what the Democrats should do or do differently, and in terms of understanding how they lost and how to win back voters, and the whole I think the whole point of what we're saying is there's a way to go back into the Rust Belt, to go back in, repair some of the losses that you've seen in the Latino and Black communities, working class people. That isn't about picking sides in the social, social issues. But that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about the unique alliances that were made in the late 19th century with the emergence of the Grange movement,
Mhm.
and how that, not to get too deep into it for time reasons, maybe we'll come back and do another episode sometime and we can get into more detail. But
I'd absolutely love to do that. This has been a
but
fascinating interview.
yeah, but just Phil, real quick about how the Grange came together, and how it put weird bedfellows together, and if there's any chance that the Democrats, I wouldn't even say the Democrats, because the Democratic Party is probably just incapable of thinking so far out of the box, but people in the Midwest who are interested in organizing can do this, because that's how it was done
Mhm.
originally. I believe it wasn't done as a party. So
Well, it was a fraternal organization, so yeah, they had potluck dinners and other things, but they were also organized around policy complaints, and their big complaint was railroads, right? The farmers were getting hosed by monopoly railroads, and to the smaller extent by monopoly mill owners, monopoly banks. And so you had this prairie populist movement that organized itself around the Grange. The thing that was so different and exciting about it then is that even though much of that movement like was merged into uh, newly forming evangelical movements, right? William Jennings Bryan was a evangelical preacher, but unlike today, that didn't stop that coalition from making common cause with urban progressives,
right,
right? So you know the populist progressive alignment, which was basically rural hayseeds versus Professor Tweezers, the farmer at in rural Wisconsin and the professor at the University of Wisconsin Madison had a common vision that they were both being imperiled by corporate monopoly and therefore came to have a common political agenda. And eventually, the high watermark of this was the election in 1912. We had four different candidates running in the general election, right? You had TR running on the bull moose policy. You had Wilson, and you had Taft, and you had Eugene Debs being the socialist, and the entire election was ranging from socialism to stand pat Republican big businessism was who's got the better plan for smashing monopolies. So the way that the progressive movement actually triumphed is by getting both parties competing to be over who could be the better anti-monopolist. And that's it reached its pinnacle in 1912. That's the moment I'm trying to reach for again. And that's why if Republicans want to join us in this, great. Don't bother me a bit, because
Yeah.
that's how change actually happens in the United States. But I do think there's a real chance for that to happen. But to make it the moment when the culture issues kind of took over is like in the 1920s when H.L. Mencken and guys like that started making all kinds of fun. Again, William Jennings Bryan's was like, remember there was the lawyer in the Scopes trial,
Yeah.
in Tennessee before educated people started making fun of the hayseeds around the Scopes trial, and that's that we've never transcended that since. But when we put that back together, when we again don't let cultural wedge issues get between us and make common cause against the monopolists, then you've got that populist progressive movement put back together again, and it'll run the world.
Yeah, and it's like in my experience, the people that are suffering from a lot of this lack of competition in these small towns, they actually do understand it, and they're very receptive to these anti-monopoly messages.
Yeah.
And probably the people that understand it less are the more well-educated
Mhm.
and with advanced degrees or four-year college degrees
because it doesn't
who
affect them as much, right?
it
Yeah.
doesn't it does affect them, but not
Not in the same way. Like I've done.
as
I'm going to jump in.
consumers. It's consumers it affects them more than as producers.
Yeah, that. But I've toured a lot and traveled around the country a lot, and a lot of that has been playing down in because of the music I play has been down south.
Yeah,
I've gone up and down I-81 in Virginia more times than I can count. Um, you know, Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama. Um, God, where was I going there? And oh yeah, now yeah, I have friends down there who are like, don't make fun of us for shopping at Walmart because that's all we have.
right.
That's all we have down here. I wish we used to have my grandpa had a business, but we haven't had that forever. So yeah, I no, they absolutely understand it in a way that someone who's like urban, a place like Philly, place like Chicago, place like even a medium-sized city probably wouldn't affect them as much.
Yeah,
Because I mean, while we've been having this discussion about the small businesses and wiping out Main Street, look, and CVS, like, look, I do have the luxury of being able to leave CVS, and now I'm going to Old Philly Pharmacy, which is a small independent pharmacy right here in Port Richmond. I have that luxury because I live in a place like Philadelphia.
right.
So to me, yeah, the monopoly shit is there and it does affect me in many ways, but in not every single way, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, but you brought up a good point, Marty.
And your
Not as
kids,
not as producers, but
your
even as a
kids.
producer, it affects me.
Well, your kid's not a good example because he's in Canada, but
Yeah,
but if you
she.
had more kids, they'd probably be okay staying in Philadelphia or its suburban environment. They wouldn't feel like they had no shot at a future
Yeah,
unless they bolted halfway across the state or the country.
that's
So
why Vermont is collapsing right now. And hear stories about it, but like the state is incredibly old, and the population growth is, I think it's negative at this point, outside of people coming from New York to buy up all the houses. But like the
yeah,
kids don't stay, the
it's
kids
not
leave.
just red states. Yeah.
Yeah,
rural states.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think the Democrats need to uh, get familiar with Philip Longman's work at the Open Markets Institute and some of the articles that we've referenced here, and really start thinking about, coming up with actual platform of issues that they can take into these communities, you know, and meet these people where they are. But I'll be honest with you, I think it really needs to be the reverse. I think that to repair the damage that's been done, it's not about going into these communities. It's about finding people in these communities to come out and to be the messengers. They're the ones, the people in those communities that can understand how some of these issues can be. And that's why I wanted to bring up the Grange, because with the Grange, people got organized on the local level in the rural areas and made common cause with progressives elsewhere. But that's what I think needs to happen. It has to be organic, coming from the areas where we lost all these votes, where we're getting 20% of the votes. The people that are going to bring that back are the people that live there,
Yeah.
not outsiders coming up with some clever slogan
No,
or trying to explain some complicated policy.
that's absolutely not going to work. I agree with you 100%.
So
Especially
part of
because
it's communications, right?
yeah,
But
yep. But you're gonna messaging comes best from people that are like you, and especially in look, people. This isn't just about rural communities. It's about everybody. But people can be clannish and outside the person is going to be able to get spread the message a lot better than the person you don't know. That's just the way it is. You
yeah,
know, the average guy, if you're having a conversation with your buddy at the bar, and he's got something to say. Okay, well, you'll listen to him. You're not necessarily going to listen to some stranger. Who the hell are
no.
you? What do you know?
I don't think like the people that we have on MSNBC, and I like them, but I don't think that they're the right kind of people to give any message to the areas that voted 80% for Trump. I think the only way you're going to do this is to have, we talk about this, how we lost the podcast war, right? We lost the social media war in this
Yep.
election. You got to have your own podcasters sending these messages, and they're getting heard. That'd be great if we were the biggest thing in Altoona, Pennsylvania. But we're a couple of Philly suburban guys, right? So
Yep.
we need people from Altoona to be doing this, and so it's
And
it's
there are a
all.
couple. There are a couple people out there doing stuff like that. I mean,
And
you
I don't
got that.
just
You got
bring
Trey
up,
Crowder. You got Trey Crowder, the liberal redneck guy. You have
yeah,
Brent Terhune, absolutely wonderful comedian. Trey Crowder's from East Tennessee.
hmm
Brent Terhune is from rural Indiana. And they're
but
both
they need
absolutely hilarious.
they
But we need
need
more like that.
you need a whole network of people, and they need welfare, as we call the wingnut welfare.
We
They
need
need
our wingnut
welfare,
welfare.
but the billionaires ain't coming to help us, and we already
We
discussed why, because they
we have
got the
one.
game
We have like
rigged.
one. We have one billionaire on our side, and it's Mark Cuban, and he can't afford to.
Hey,
to
fuck that guy. He's not on our side. I
he acts like it.
Uh,
He says he was for Harris. That's at least something.
He also has
uh,
that. He also has that low cost pharmacy he's got going on too, and that's a real thing.
All
I
right.
know
I think
people.
he
I know
demanded
people that.
that Harris hire Lena Khan. Didn't he do that during the election?
Did he
I think
fire
he.
her? Yeah.
No,
He
I
he
think he
demand that
demanded.
was his price.
He
He
wanted
Yeah.
demanded that
that
he
she
wanted her
fire him.
out.
Oh,
Yeah.
fuck him then.
Yeah.
Suck a
Yeah,
dick. I take it
Yeah.
all
yeah,
back.
Yeah. Take it all
yeah.
back.
I take it all back. He's a douche.
Yes, he is.
I would just amend what you're saying about small town America. It's like a lot of us knowledge workers, college grads, we're also now part of this phenomenon, right? I've lost my career to monopoly. I spent the best years of my life climbing up the corporate ladder of mainstream media. Google smashed it.
Right.
right? It's gone with the wind, right?
Yeah.
My
Nobody
friend Tim
makes
Kelly
a
lost it.
living as a journalist. Yeah,
My
and
friend Tim Kelly lost his living that way. He was at Thomson Reuters, all gone. Bye bye.
Yep.
yeah, that's right. And with AI coming along, which is itself unbelievably monopolized,
Oh
you're
yeah.
going to see a lot of very educated people suddenly made into serfs. Again, they're going to have the same. It's going to have the same root cause: public policy that enabled monopolization that in a previous era would have been illegal. Right? It's all preventable. Can all be fixed.
So
But
I got one a somewhat self-serving way to summarize this, which is the fact that the Republicans have figured out how to win elections when like every paper in the country is endorsing their opponent. That when they showed some stat that people that get their news from mainstream sources voted like I don't know 80% for Biden. People who
Hmm.
never watch the news voted like overwhelmingly for Trump. So what the I guess the good thing is the billionaires control the Washington Post and all these traditional the NBC and all that, but it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, nobody reads them.
Right. So what that means is if we can just figure out how to get the message to the people, it actually will work, right? We just saw it work the other way around. So if people on the left understand you got to support podcasters like me and Brendan, right? Because
Mhm.
and not just us obviously, but if you want to give to our Patreon that would be awesome.
That's patreon.com/progress pondcast
Yeah.
with an N, pondcast.
Like I said, this is a very self-serving take on my part, but it's true. Like I
Yeah, who
can
can
save the
blame me for
world
we need to make a buck. We're doing a good thing. We're not telling lies to people. We're educating people. We deserve the money we get for that.
for $5.
Mhm.
I can easily save the world. I'm
Yeah.
just yeah, but but that's kind of my optimistic take to finish here because there's got to be a way to get the message out uh, organically. Like that's how I think the left should be organizing. It's got to be a lot of talking to people where they're at and finding people in the communities where we need to do better
Yep.
and helping them. So it's a lot of people
Hmm.
helping each other.
Yeah.
And it can't just sit around waiting for some sugar daddy to come in and sprinkle money on everybody because it ain't going to happen because they've rigged the system in a way they're very happy with.
Yeah.
And that's why the Democrats don't get wingnut welfare because they can't control the message. The Democrats go on their podcast and start talking about socialized medicine and shit. And they're like, I don't want that. I don't want to fund that,
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's how you go. So, Philip, I wish we could talk forever, on all these issues, but there's a limit to how long people will listen to a podcast.
And I don't want to be editing for 3 days.
We've probably exceeded it by several hours here. So, with that, I think we should do this again. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, man.
Well,
This was there's a reason this went on so long. This was a fascinating interview. The
thank you.
I personally learned a lot. The woo.
Well, I'm so grateful to you, Brendan and Martin, for giving me this opportunity, and I'll be happy to come back. Talk
All
your ear
We're
right,
off.
we're gonna be glad to have you.
we got to craft
All
a
right.
revolution. All right,
Yeah.
On
All
that
right.
note, this has been episode 19 of the Progress Pondcast with Martin Longman, Brendan Squire, and our special guest, the Washington Monthly's Philip Longman. You can find us on all of the monopolized platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, um,
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio, Castbox. There's a couple others I'm missing. If you like what you heard, remember to please like, follow, and subscribe on those platforms. Share us with your friends, with your family. Share it on all the social media. But of course, the best way to support us is on Patreon. I'm actually kind of worried right now that the hard drive where I store all of our collateral and stuff may need to be replaced. So your money could help fix something like that. You can find us at www.patreon.com/progress pondcast. That's pond with an N. We'd love your support, and we will see you next time when we get to episode 20 of the Progress Podcast. Over and out, folks. Have yourself a good one,
Over and
Take
out.
care.
and happy holidays.
And
Bye bye
happy
now.
holidays. Bye bye.